my friends. We are talking about, oh, no we're not, because she doesn't want to follow. Come on. Okay, so we're talking about lessons in chemistry, but first, because it's hot, let's go with one of these. I got one of these dot bubble tea sparkling mango and passion fruit ones. I'm really excited about it, and it's actually what inspired me to do this video today. So let's give it a, well, how the hell are you supposed to get that in there then? Hello? This straw is too fat. Oh, okay. Okay, give it a mix. Okay, I got some boba. It's a bit mid. Anyway, let's crack on. Lessons in chemistry. My friend at work decided to start like a book club. Okay, sorry friends, I'm having technical difficulties. I don't know if this is going to work, but this is going to be fine. I'm not sure which part the other bit I left in, but I'm drinking this for fun. I wish it was sweeter. It's a bit mid, to be honest, but it is low in sugar, so I guess. Yum. But today we're talking about lessons in chemistry. I don't have the book because I lent it to my friend. Also, I tore a page in it by accident because I was getting a little bit trigger happy with my what do you call it? With me bookmark, that's what it's called. Anyway, lessons in chemistry. So basically, lessons in chemistry addresses like issues in the 1960s, especially in like male dominated fields, so in this case the science industry. We're talking from one lady's perspective and all the things like the systemic flaws and like discrimination and stuff that's happening to her throughout that. So it's basically, I believe it's like trying to like tackle strong issues in society, because even though we've like come so far since 1960s, these kind of discriminations still happen. So it's quite intriguing to see it written from the perspective of the 1960s when it's much worse, but when you're realizing that these issues after all these years, like 60 years later, could still be occurring. So it's like critiquing restrictions on women and like capitalism and like going against like societal norms, etc, etc. But let's go on Goodreads. This book this is by Bonnie Garmus, by the way. 4.28, so pretty good. It's got 1,618,245 ratings. This is why it was a New York Times bestseller. But also it's got 143,265 reviews. Now, let's get to the reviews. It's quite a mixed bag, but I feel that people either really liked it or kind of hated it, and a lot of the comments I saw were about the fact that it's not factually correct. And being in the science field myself, not chemistry but biology, I can say that when I was reading it, I wasn't reading it for that. So I was never thinking like, oh, this is going to be like completely factually correct. I did enjoy the one chapter where they were applying like different types of bonding, so covalent bonding, ionic bonding, and hydrogen bonding to real life situations to let the lay person to understand. And I think the whole point of the book was to get lay people to understand that they need to know how things work, and doesn't make them nerdy or goes against anything. It's just like, it's good to know how things work. Like, you should know how your car works, you should know like how your body works and stuff like that. Like, don't just expect other people to know. And I don't think that it should be ridiculed for that. Again, I don't think it was trying to be. I don't think Bonnie I don't think she's a scientist, but I think she worked in the medical writing field. But I don't think that's what she's trying to get across. Otherwise, she would have written a non-fiction book, a textbook, whatever. So I don't think that's what she was doing. But I know that a lot of the comments were from chemists who were saying that this is the exact type of like stereotypical stuff they don't want to talk about. Like, they don't call water H2O, or they don't call salt sodium sodium chloride on a like general basis, and they don't call vinegar acetic acid and all of that. And so they wanted to push away from this like snobby, pretentious background. But if anything, I think this book was just trying to give exposure, because imagine how many people have read this who didn't, like, always hated science, didn't know anything about science. And it's not about that, I'm telling you. It's supposed to be about discrimination. This book could have easily been set in a publishing house, it could have been easily set in the medical field, but it's not. So just saying. And then someone was like, oh, Cambridge doesn't even have rowing scholarships. So what? It's a fictional story. It's a fictional story. Other people said that this book was described as laugh out loud funny. I personally didn't find it laugh out loud funny, and mostly because I don't think it should have been laugh out loud funny, because A, some dark things happen. There's a lot of like dark topics that are mentioned. We'll get there. But also it's like a piece on society and a critique on societal standings. So I don't think it was ever supposed to be funny. So I'm not sure who said it was laugh out loud funny, or why the fans of Marvelous Mrs. Maisel would ever have been like recommending it, unless they have a very broad range, which I appreciate, because I feel like I am. Someone said this book is mind-numbingly bad. I disagree. I found it quite easy to read. I read it in 2 days. It was really easy to read. The prose was easy to read, in my opinion, and I think the pace was pretty good. So, I don't know. There was some jaw-dropping moments, but people are like, they don't get the hype. So now let me explain to you why people don't get the hype, because here is our summary. This is what you're here for Lessons in Chemistry. So we've got scientist Elizabeth Zott. She prepares her daughter, Mad. Yes, her name is actually legally Mad, we discover at one point, but she to not make people alarmed, she calls her Madeline, which is kind of contradictory, I suppose, but she called her Mad because she was driving her mad when she was little. But she's packing her daughter's school lunches and going to present a really popular TV show that she is the host of, called Supper at 6. It's a job that she didn't really want, but it kind of just happened as a consequence, because she was confronting the parent of one of her daughter's schoolmates who was eating her lunches, who happens to be the executive there, and so when he found out that how it's like her personality, she's quite assertive, to the point, blunt, and also she makes good food, he was like, oh, I need a TV show, so here we go. So he offers her a regular role on the TV show, and Elizabeth needs some money, so she accepts it. But then we go right back in time, so it shows us in Elizabeth in 1952, so this is like 10 years prior to that, where she's trying to make her name as a chemist at this company called Hastings Research Institute in California, and she's working on abiogenesis, but she left the UCLA's doctoral program before getting her PhD. It's pretty bad why she does have to leave, but she's basically compelled to leave because her supervisor cornered her and then raped her, and she defended herself by stabbing him, but because he was bringing a lot of funding to the place, they got rid of her, not him. So she's treated as second class because she's a chemist at this place, but she's just a woman, so they think that she should be getting coffee and stuff like that, but she's actually really smart. And then she meets a renowned chemist called Calvin Evans, who actually mistakes her for a secretary, so kind of a red flag there. But I guess everybody was kind of going with that, so he was just kind of going with the norms at the time. He kind of redeems himself, in which they are platonic colleagues. They don't start off with the best way, she's stealing his beakers, whatever, but they develop a research partnership and then end up actually falling in love. They actually are trying to navigate together the unfriendly and toxic work environment. They both have their pros and cons, but they're both trying to make their way in the industry, and they're both facing their own issues. Even Calvin, as a man, is also facing his issues, but that's not to say that his issues are more than Elizabeth's, but he also has issues, and he does sort of, it's kind of hard to explain, but there's a bit of discourse and social commentary about like how much they should care what other people think, but also like Calvin coming around to her way of thinking sometimes. But they have some scrutiny on their relationship. Elizabeth cooks for Calvin and herself every day, and she basically uses chemistry in her cooking, and she tries to perfect her dishes. one point, obviously they love each other, even though everybody thinks that Elizabeth is just with Calvin for his fame and his money. But Calvin proposes, but she says no, because she doesn't want to sacrifice her career by taking his name, even though he says, you don't have to. And it's kind of funny because at one point he says, you know what, actually, no, I don't want to marry you because I was going to ask you, but now you've annoyed me, which I thought was kind of iconic, but whatever. And they find a stray dog, which they adopt, called 6:30, because that is the time that they found her, or him, whatever. Him, I think. There's also, they take up the rowing part, completely irrelevant. I don't understand the whole bit. I didn't understand a single thing about rowing. Don't tell me about rowing. I was confused. So if you know about rowing, what the flip is two-seat? What the flip is a two-seat? I have no absolute idea. Is it just two people in the rowboat? I don't know. Anyway. But then everything seems to go well, but then Calvin dies in an accident. The way he dies is actually quite tragic. I kind of thought it was going to happen. I knew almost from the start of the book that this man was about to die, but he was kind of obsessed with her dying because he has a pretty tragic past where his family keeps dying. So he thinks that she's going to die. Obviously, of course, he turns out to die, but it's because they've been, the state has started a law where you have to put your dog on a leash. They never did that with 6:30. Then that one day he decided to put the dog on the leash, and the leash kind of resulted in that accident, but not entirely. Anyway, that all happens. He passes away, but guess what? Elizabeth's pregnant. Great for her. And now she gets even worse treatment because she gets fired because no such thing as maternity pay back then and stuff like that. So because she can't go back, she turns her kitchen into a lab, kind of iconic, but also how are you cooking? But she continues doing her research, she consults and copy edits because it looks like nobody else at this company knows how to do any work, which, I mean, sometimes can be true. Sometimes I think that about colleagues that I've worked with in the past, but surely somebody knows what they're doing. Apparently these two were the only ones who knew how to work, and one died and one was fired because she was about to have a baby. But anyway, so all these like little minions keep running over to her to get her help, and she just like charges them and consults. And then she gives birth to her daughter, who she christens Mad Zot, and like I said, she just tells everyone that her name is actually Madeline. And then she gets some help from her neighbour called Harriet Salone, and also her obstetrician and rowing coach, Dr. Mason. I get rowing as too big of a part of this. Elizabeth tries to raise her baby, so she's trying to make whatever money she can, but it's pretty hard. She returns to Hastings, but the main guy there, Dr. Donati, refuses to give her back her research that her and Calvin worked on, and she's basically forced to be a lab tech, even though she's supposed to be so smart and all of that kind of stuff. By the way, this whole time there was a big funder who was funding Elizabeth's work at the company, but they were just telling the funder that it was a man who was doing it, and they were basically taking credit for it instead of her. Anyway, she has a nasty confrontation, and then she also has a confrontation with the office manager, who's this lady called Frask, who also reveals that she was also sexually assaulted and prevented from finishing her PhD in psychology, which is also why she was there. And then Frask is basically fired for gaining weight. That's really terrible, really, really terrible. But before she leaves, she decides to give all of Calvin's files to Elizabeth, and then that's when Elizabeth finds out that Donati has actually been plagiarizing her work along with other male members. So she quits and she leaves Hastings. And then we return back to 1961, where Walter Pine offers her the job to present for the cooking show, and she has to accept. So Walter's superior is called Phil Lebensol, and he insists that Elizabeth's a bit too blunt for live TV, and he wants her to be a specific way for supper at 6, and he wants her to be like charming and alluring and all of that. Elizabeth is like, no, I don't want to wear these tight clothes and stuff. I want to be like a normal person. So she refuses to read the cue cards that Walter writes, and she describes her cooking in a way that might be considered not the most ideal, and she does it in a scientific way, and even though Phil is really angry, the show actually becomes quite popular, especially among young housewives who appreciate her intelligence and stuff like that. Meanwhile, Harriet Sloane's friend, she's helping look after Mad, and all of that. And then Harriet lets slip some information about Calvin to Mad when she's working on her family tree. And so she starts trying to investigate more about her dad and her background. And then she realizes that there was a reverend called Reverend Wakely, who was a pen pal of her father's. And he insists he assists her investigating the orphanage in which Calvin was brought up. And then we find out that the Parker Foundation is a foundation that has lots of money and it donates to worthy causes, but all this time Calvin didn't actually know that that connection is his mother. So his mom is the main person, Avery Parker, and the priest lied to the Calvin family, who told them that he had died, because they thought that that person would give money, which they did, because they thought that their son had died in their cab of pneumonia or something. Anyway, on air, Elizabeth offends sponsors because she's like calling the products trash, like she's saying the soup is terrible and stuff like that. So then Phil, whatever his name is, summons her, and in the office he fires her, but then also tries to assault her. However, iconic for her, she pulls a chef knife out of her bag, and that gives him a heart attack. So she doesn't actually attack him, but and then we also find out that he's been hiding sponsorship offers and deals for the show. And while that guy's in the hospital recovering, Walter, he kind of deserves it, is hired as his replacement. Then Elizabeth gets an offer from Life magazine for an interview. She doesn't really want to at first, but then she gets convinced by Harry and Walter, and then this is the first time she shares her entire story. So sharing about the sexual assault, her feelings about Calvin's death, like all of that. He writes an article actually highlighting her scientific work, which is what she wanted this whole time, but obviously the piece doesn't go to print like that. It's heavily distorted, and everything else is changed. So she's like, whatever. So she becomes a bit depressed and she feels useless and betrayed, because this whole time she's saying that she's a chemist on the TV, but now she's like, actually maybe I'm not. But we actually find out that Roth resigns from Life magazine and tries to publish a truthful account, and leaves a copy for Elizabeth at her house, where Mads finds it, and she gives it to Frask, the typist for now Reverend Wakely. Everything's quite cyclical here, and Frask is infuriated by what Life has said, so she publicly says that the article is misleading. And then we find out that Roth's original work, so the one that wasn't published, is picked up by Vogue and published by them. But she's still a bit sad about it, Elizabeth, I mean, and she decides to leave Supper at 6 to pursue aborigines again. And although she doesn't have any job offers, which she thought she would get after the Vogue piece, but she didn't, Frask, who is now the head there, decides to invite her back to Hastings, and the Parker Foundation has taken over Hastings, dismisses Frask, appoints Frask, dismisses Donati, appoints Frask, the woman who got filed for gaining too much weight, and they offer Elizabeth the head position in chemistry. And then this is when we find out that Avery Parker actually is Calvin's biological mother. She gave birth to him, and because of family pressure, because she was unmarried, she was forced to give him up, but she was told that he had died, even when she tried to reconnect. And she'd never met her son before the accident, but now she wants to build a relationship with her granddaughter. So the book ends with Elizabeth welcoming Avery and inviting her to come for supper at 6 at their house, and re-engaging her with chemistry, the research she does at the lab. Now, like I said, the whole point of this book, I don't think, was ever to say like about proper tell you, like, it's not going to tell you about all the bonding and all the chemical reactions and distillation and la la la. I think the point was the social commentary, so talking about discrimination and the terrible things that happen. And I mean, all these things were happening to, like, 2 women were raped by their PhD advisors in just this small in this small area, but nobody was saying anything. And these 2 women were head to head for a while, even though they were in completely different areas of the company, because they were female at this company. They were being like battled against each other. So much so that they didn't even realise how many similarities they actually had. So I think that's kind of the point of the book. So when people be saying they don't understand and are rating it 1 star, I think that might be an issue with them, because I think it's raising awareness, because these kind of things can still happen, and it's real bad, especially in male-dominated areas. But like I said, it's not just bringing across the male domination of areas and the discrimination that can happen in that way, but it's also talking about like males against males. Like we see that Walter Pine is not discriminated against, but kind of discriminated against by his superior, and the same with Calvin and the like Donotti. Like there was friction internally there as well. So I think that just based on the social commentary alone, I would give it like 3.8, 3.9, 4 stars. Yeah, that's enough for me. I thought it was great. It was real easy to read and would read again. So I feel like I couldn't give a witty summary. Not that I'm calling myself witty, because I'm not, but I couldn't give a witty summary because I think it was just too dark. Like the dark topics they talk about, you know, like young children's parents dying, they talk about suicide, they talk about a lot of things like rape, they talk about religion, they talk about, because that's another thing, she announces on air that she's an atheist and people be sending her death threats. Yes. What else? They're like bullying at school, like rejection in many a way. So yeah, I highly recommend. Give it a read. Give it a read if you haven't already read it. I mean, I think it came out in like 2023, so you probably have already read it, but okay, bye.